Professor Bashar Malkawi. Professor Malkawi is Dean and Professor of Law at the University of Sharjah in the United Arab Emirates. He's been educated in America at the American University, Washington College of Law. He's also got an LLM in International Trade Law from the University of Arizona. Lots of publications. So Professor Malkawi, on the interest of time, I probably won't list all of your publications, but if you look at Professor Malkawi's biography, lots of publications, numerous awards for his work as well. Today he's going to be talking to us about, again, a very interesting topic, legal education in the Middle East. What types of lawyers the Middle East must have. So I'll hand over to you, Professor Malkawi.
Thank you so much, Professor Kalahar, for the nice introduction, and thanks also for CUHK Law for hosting this conference. It's my first time participation in this conference. I'm excited to participate and meeting virtually new colleagues. In the interest of time, I think I'll start my presentation with regard to legal education in the Middle East. I think when any reader or historian will look back at the history of legal education in the Middle East, he will find that for most of many centuries ago, until fairly early in the beginning of the 20th century, laws in the Middle East were governed by Islamic law, whether I'm talking about the main sources in Islamic law or I'm talking about the secondary sources. This also supplemented by customs that were developed over the years. And during that particular period of time, there were Bedouin sort of courts. Those are Bedouin laws that were formed by tribes along Middle Eastern countries, and they ruled or issued judgments based not necessarily on Islamic law, but also based on customs. Legal representation during that period of time was not necessary, as disputants can appear before this Bedouin court by themselves. There were no need for legal representation, and as such there was no need for formal legal education in the sense that we know it these days. After the colonization and many Arab countries moved into modifying the legal system, and I can say or argue that now we have in the Middle East a plural legal system where there is the Islamic law, where there is the civil code, and in few countries such as in Sudan you'll find the application of common law, and the Islamic law now is limited only to personal status issues such as marriage or divorce and child custody, but otherwise all legal education is governed by what's called or known as the civil code or the Latin legal system. When I'm talking about legal education in the Middle East, I'm talking about institutions of higher education that represent some well-respected tradition in the Middle East. Of course, the Middle East has a culture of attainment of higher education. There are the social and business communities that long associated with higher education, and the economic importance of having a college or university degrees. Now, if I compare legal education with business education in the Middle East, I can tell you that there has been a neglect of legal education that resulted, unfortunately, in underperforming by some colleges all over the Middle East. Just to give you a little bit of background about legal education in the Middle East, it's basically undergraduate education. The emphasis, and I emphasize on this, is basically on theory. It caters lawyers as technicians, unlike legal education in the US, for example, where many professional education catering lawyers as sort of social engineers or problem solvers. And I'll talk a bit about this later on. Of course, legal scholarship is in the Middle East is often very abstract, less concerned with the concrete social problems that we can find in the US or UK or Australian legal scholarship. Of course, I'm not providing a bleak picture for legal education in the Middle East, but I'm saying there is room for improvement. There is room to transplant some techniques of learning and teaching from other countries, such as the critical thinking approach. That's why I would say that training of law students in the Middle East lacks the broadening enrichment of a critical debate, something we've seen in other countries. The instruction is focused in large part or as authoritarian in style, with emphasis on memorization and lectures. Now, for those of us who were fortunate to study abroad, the first thing that we learned in law school in the US, for example, is how to think a lawyer. Now, of course, on a more positive note, thinking like a lawyer defined as being able to see, to assess, to argue for both sides, to exercise reasoned judgment about legal issues. Of course, it's a process that has certain characteristics about using argument, how to achieve conclusion, and all of this is really absent from legal education in the Middle East. For legal education in the Middle East, it's still the traditional way, in the sense of focusing on theory, and then assume this graduate, upon graduation, will attain all the legal skills needed to survive in a practice later on in life. So the function of law school in the Middle East is not to graduate or provide education for lawyers who are already on day 1 to assume all the skills needed to succeed as a lawyer. Of course, when I'm talking about thinking like a lawyer and critical thinking, I'm talking about how you analyze the issue, how you figure out the rule that applies and how you apply it, and then how you come to a conclusion, and ultimately how you may propose even some policy recommendations. Now, with regard to technology, I think the good thing in the midst of the COVID-19 health crisis, that law schools in particular in the Middle East were forced to adopt change that I would think would never have been adopted without this unfortunate COVID-19 health crisis. So they moved, of course, all classes for online education. There were hiccups in the process, but I could tell that the experience to some extent were successful. So I would contend that law schools in the Middle East needs a change. We will have to ask questions that do we provide the education that will give students the opportunity to know how to draft a complaint, how to do or draft a search warrant, how to prosecute, defend the preliminary hearing, conduct initial client interview, argue for bail, they provide advice to clients, how to prepare a case for a trial, and the list can go on and on. So these are the critical skills that a lawyer would need to succeed. And sort the law schools should move from teaching theory and material text into moving into professional practical aspect, so that graduates can be ready to assume more active role as a lawyer and not wait for 1-2 years until they really achieve the level that could have achieved in law school. This, I would argue also in this particular area to maintain the tradition which is enshrined for so many years in Arab countries by focusing on Islamic law and the civil code tradition, but also have some space or room for adopting the practical skills that would provide graduates with the necessary or skills to succeed in practice. This can be linked also with reforming the curriculum. I always look at law schools in Hong Kong, China, the US, everywhere, and I envy these law schools because they're so open to many issues like Professor Karar just a few minutes ago talked about law and culture. So I wish that the curriculum law schools in the Middle East can be reformed so as to add new courses, new areas. Just in conclusion, I'm not here to draw a black picture for education in the Middle East. I understand that there is a long tradition and history, but sometimes change is necessary in order to compete not even locally or regionally, but at the international level. And I hope I finished, I guess, earlier. Thank you so much for listening.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Malkawi. You don't have to apologize for finishing early. That's always a wonderful thing to do. To be punctual, to be succinct is always good. Please remember, you can chat in any questions you have to Professor Malkawi, because we have finished a little bit earlier. I've actually got one, and I should say this has come from one of the other people who was part of the founding team to actually set up the Directions in Legal Education conference. So hopefully she won't mention Esther Erlings, who's now in Australia, has just sent this question in. So I think this is one of the wonders of this conference. We have people in the Middle East coming to a conference that's situated in Hong Kong and getting questions from people in Australia as well. With the question is this, I should get to the question. The question is this, do you have a sort of separation of an academic and professional legal training as well? Do you, in the Middle East law schools, do you have a sort of, as we do with an LLB or a JD, an academic degree, and then a professional course on top of that?
No, not really. So for law schools in the Middle East, the focus is on providing the legal education. It's not the task of law school to provide professional training for law students. What happens is upon graduation, the student will have to enroll in a law firm and practice as intern for about between 1 to 2 years. And during this period of time, the student will have to pass the bar exam. It's a centralized exam by the Bar Association in every country. And upon that, he or she can get the license to practice. So it takes about 6 to 7 years to get the license to practice as a lawyer. I think the period of time could be shortened if law schools in the Middle East are professional oriented, but this is not the case right now.
Well, thank you very much. Actually, we're getting follow-ups on that as well. Is a good theoretical foundation in law not important to become a good lawyer as well?
It's important to have, of course, a theoretical foundation, but you don't have to take it to the extreme where the focus was really on the text and the text is the one that determines whether you are a successful graduate or not. I mean, there are other skills that that one can accumulate during law school through internship and other practical skills, clinics, for example. That these are the type of skills that have long-lasting impact. For the short term, yes, the theory is important, and one can pass law school. But when we're talking about long-lasting skills that needed, perhaps some of the things I mentioned earlier would be very helpful.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I know that legal education. We know there are big changes being undertaken around the world. For example, in England, of course, there are different approaches now going towards legal education as well. And of course, even in Hong Kong, there have been suggestions from various bodies about different examinations to be held. So if I understand it, then in the Middle East, it's more of a system akin to the American. There's an academic stage, and then there's a sort of a bar exam. Is that right?
Yes, there's the academic stage, which would last between 4 to 5 years, and upon graduation, the student will find an internship in a law firm and practice for about 2 years, and upon that, he or she may get her license to practice. So I get a lot of comments that there is always a need for reform of legal education and focus on legal skills such as or critical thinking, which is very important and very needed indeed for any lawyers to succeed in a practice, which is, in my own opinion, more important than theory.
Great. Thank you very much.